Committee on Emerging Issues will come to order. Please call the roll.
Chairman Patterson.
Here.
Vice Chairman Davidson. Here. Representatives Ani. Here. Cupps. Fitzwater. Vogel. Here. Gregory. Here. Hafner. Hicks. Here. McCrary. Here. Ritchie. Sauls. Smith. Here. Taylor.
10 present, we have a quorum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We will begin public testimony on House Bills 1997 and 2167 with Representatives Hayden and Porter. Representatives, please begin when you're ready. Please speak directly into the mic so it picks it up. Witnesses, please fill out a witness form, and members, when you're recognized, just go ahead and ask your questions. You don't have to ask permission. Representatives, please proceed.
Thank you. I'm Representative Kent Hayden. I represent District 43. I'm from Mexico, Missouri. District 43 includes of northern, eastern Callaway County, and all of Audrain County. And Representative Porter and I are going to kind of tag team these two bills. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and then he's going to turn it back to me. Jeff's going to talk about history and kind of where we're at the last 2 years.
Thank you, Kent. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jeff Porter, State Rep for District 42, which is all Montgomery County, most of Warren County, and a portion of San Charles County around the Augusta area. We're here to talk about the solar bills. We're just going to, for House Bill 2167 and 1997. I had this bill, a similar bill 2 years ago. I'm going to give a little historical value before we go back to the current stage where Mr. Hayden's going to talk about that. 2 years ago, we had a big issue in Warren County. We had a lot of acres coming to the forefront to be used for solar purposes, about 4,000 to 5,000 acres, so it was very significant. And it was going to be very impactful for the school district, so we need to have something in place. It didn't work out. It went before the Ways and Means Committee. It didn't come to terms, and unfortunately, it'd been nice to have that because now the rest of the state's going to be having more of these types of things up, which would affect our public schools. During that time frame, Warren County went ahead and went a different route to kind of give an idea. They went through a permitting process where basically they had planning and zoning. So part of the benefits of that is that basically they had a chance to construct it for the local level, which came, and they worked in conjunction with a solar company, worked out pretty well. Some of the benefits from that type of process, if you have planning and zoning, they had some other possibilities to work on, like soil management, because a lot of times they worry about erosion, so they had those kind of things built in the process. The fees were also figured into the whole situation where it take care of the local school districts and other aspects of that tax that would have been lost from the idea of being exempt from tax. Then eventually they couldn't have it and allow the money to come back to those other areas that they're used to from the ag rates. Some other things they could do with that permit process was deer management, because a lot of times with these products, a lot of times deer can be a problem for the panels as well as for the deer hunters to have a lot of these deer getting hurt because of the panels. So there's just a lot of things, and the most important thing was having a surety bond in place to take it back to pre-construction phase of $1 million or whatever they come up with for that. So some of those things has happened, resulted that bill was not put in place 2 years ago. Now, in Montgomery County, we're in a different stage because it's kind of been working its way out. So Montgomery County doesn't have the planning and zoning to the same level Warren County was. So they're trying to decide what they want to do. Of course, some of these areas, they want to be near a grid where they have a plug-in to take advantage of all the electricity that's being produced from solar panels. And I'm not against solar panels at all. I think it's a great opportunity for the farmers that are in situations where they would have a chance to use that as a retirement income for the rest of their lives until they move on. I think it's great for that standpoint. But a lot of times we have to work out these areas which are good economic development areas for future jobs, because they also would need that power plug-in point. Example could be, you might have American Foods Group was a big deal that was in Warren County that was looking for an area like that. So if we had something that needed a big plug-in where they need to have power generation, we want to make sure they have the jobs, because jobs is the biggest thing to keep our people locally there. That kind of gives you an idea of what the historical value of what has happened in the past. We need to make sure we have something in place to protect what's being lost by lost revenue. And at this time, I'll turn this back to Representative Hayden.
Thank you. I was brought into this situation about solar energy and panels probably 2 years ago. The members of my county court, the commissioners, talked to me about, hey, we've got several discussions of wind and solar projects in our county. And at that time, it was probably 250 acres. That has swelled that in my district right now, there's close to 6,000 acres under contract for solar farms. And one of the situations that I wasn't aware of, I don't know if some of you may be, but I certainly wasn't. If you look at section 137-100 of the law, it says the following subjects are exempt from taxation for state, county, and local purposes. And if you look down, number 10 is solar energy systems not held for resale are exempt from county, state taxes. The number of these units, solar farms that are moving in, has really increased very, very rapidly. They're looking for places that have flat, have a substation close, and have no trees. That works well in my district for the very best farmland that we have. And one of the concerns we have, I'm all for owners' rights on land. I think it's great. A lot of the people that have been raised with, been friends with for years, have contracted some of this land for these purposes. It makes for great transmission of passing wealth on to relatives without fights over the family farm, without having to sell the family farm. But there is, for everything, for each reaction is an equal and opposite reaction. And if we're looking at 6,000 acres of land that will produce, let's put it this way, it's fertilized to produce 200 bushel of corn. Doesn't always do it, but it's fertilized for that. That's the best land in Audrain and Callaway counties. And that would produce typically about, at today's prices, let's say it's $6 a bushel for corn, whatever. That may not be quite right, but it's very close. And 200 bushel, that'd be 1,200 bushels. So that'd be about $1,800. If you look at a multiplier factor, University of Missouri uses at 1.3. That's the effect that amount of would have in our communities with a 1.3 economic factor. So when we take that amount of land out, we have fertilizer dealers, we have implement dealers, we have car dealers, we have seed dealers, we have ethanol plants that are planning to use that product in their process. We have biofuels plants that in that same district they were planning to use the beans for production of biofuels, which makes for soybean meal and biodiesel. All these things would be affected by those acres being taken out. And they're not only affected for a year, most of these are 40-year contracts. So the economic impact in these communities is very high. One of the things we always hear is, well, we don't want to, several people in the Assembly have voted for no new taxes. Well, this is going to be, a lot of these people will find their businesses drastically affected. And as one of them told me, he said, you don't have to take all my business. You just take my top 25, 30%, and I'm out of business. So this could have a really drastic effect on the supply business in those areas which do pay taxes. So somewhere along, we have the real strong possibility of losing quite a bit of taxes. Now, this land would go from agricultural to commercial for taxation purposes. In Audrain and Callaway County, that's somewhere about $250, $260 an acre difference, which the county would get the benefit of. But again, that still probably won't make up for the differences we're losing in taxation from other businesses that will be affected and reduced. The other aspect of this, I think I find it unusual that we have one part of the energy system that doesn't pay these taxes and all the rest do in some form or way or another. The 37.5% that we have for a taxation rate, that is what the wind bill that we passed paid. I understand that rate could be argued and discussed, and I'm open to do that. But again, that's the same rate that wind has, a bill we passed 2 years ago. So again, I'm open to any questions you have. Again, the biggest thing to remember, for each reaction is an equal opposite reaction. In these communities, they're going to be affected for 40 years. No houses, no truck stops, no stores, no nothing built on these acreage. And the speed they're developing, you don't find 30, 40, and 50 acres. You find 200, you find 2,000 acres in a pop in a lot of these. 1,000, 2,000 acres is what's being developed in the area I'm in. So, again, it's a very fast-moving. As one lobbyist told me, he had 6 inquiries before it was sent to committee, and I think he had 30 the day it was sent to committee. So, is there interest? Yes. Are they trying to fly below the radar? Yes. Several of these companies have made deals, worked with deals with the local county commissions and the school districts of what they would like to pay in lieu of taxes. Some others have flat told me they're not going to pay taxes. So that's kind of dichotomy of where we're at, and how do we get to somewhere where local governments, the counties, the schools know what they're getting, as well as the people who are trying to make plans to develop these. They understand, here's the ground rules we're playing under. So I'd like to entertain any questions.
All right, thank you, Representative. Thanks for that presentation. There's that solar farm, I think it's in Montgomery County.
That's correct.
How much energy does that produce? Just does anybody know?
It's a startup. I'll let them
Okay.
refer to that. A lot of these, there'll be people testify as to what their capabilities of per solar unit. And in all honesty, some states do tax based upon the rating on the solar unit rather than the construction cost. Illinois does that, as I understand it. So I'll let them talk to the ratings.
And then does that stay in, that energy stay local, or where does it go?
Under this bill, it would stay local just like wind.
Okay, but currently it can go anywhere?
Currently, there's no tax.
Okay.
Exempt. Oh, no, the energy goes to the substation, and then it could go anywhere they distribute it or sell it to.
So we don't know if the energy stays local?
No, I don't know where it goes once it goes to the substation.
Okay. Any questions?
And I would guess it'd be vary. Some of them probably go quite a bit of distance. Some of them maybe
Right.
go to a town right close.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Representative Davidson.
So these companies or owners, they don't pay any tax on the property they own at all?
They pay, right now, the land's being paid as agricultural tax. The assumption it would go to commercial, which again is $250 an acre more. But there are some companies I do know have plans to have eco grazing, which would be a lot of goats and sheep, to graze between the panels. If you've ever dealt with goats and sheep in that manner, I'm not sure that's going to work. But there are some that are discussing having basically plants that would, for pollinators, would go in between. If they did that, then they may very well be agricultural, and there would be no.
So they sort of oscillate between agricultural and commercial, depending on what
and
what else
most
they do.
assumptions is it'd be commercial, but again, people can be pretty creative for $250 an acre.
Yeah.
And a lot of these companies that I'm aware of, on their contracts with producers, they lease it, they have an agreement, they will pay increase in tax. So again, I would not be surprised to see some innovative agricultural purposes, and if that happens, then there would be no increase in the land values, no increase in the taxation.
Is there any taxation on, like a consumption tax of any sort on the energy that's generated when they're selling that energy, whether it be to? Does that make sense? And that may be a different question for
somebody else
else
will have to
in the
answer that,
room.
because
Yeah.
I don't know that. They're selling it to somebody. Of course, the one at Montgomery City is Ameren, as I understand it. They own the ground too, so that's a end to end. But somebody else will have to answer that question. Most of it will be resold.
Thank you.
Further questions, Representative Ani.
To inquire. Just one quick question. Is the construction or operation of these solar farms creating jobs or generating any additional revenue in these counties that could potentially offset these losses, or?
As I understand it, I don't know what the construction crews, during the construction phase, obviously there would be jobs created. My understanding, after they're up and running, my understanding, again, I'm not an expert in this piece, there'd be about half as many jobs as there might be when it was still being farmed. And That's kind of worried. But the generation after that, there's not much local community generation. Now, is it green energy? Yes. Is it energy that we're going to need if we're going to have all electric cars? The answer is yes. I'm not opposed to it. Again, I just think I think we're picking winners and losers if we don't have an adjustment to the tax base on this.
Representative Gregory.
To inquire. So the way I understand it, you picked out the 37% tax cost just because that's what's on wind energy. Is that correct?
That is correct. This is a duplicate of wind as it sits right now.
Was there any input in talking with any of the solar companies on that before you filed this, or just say this is our starting point?
We had, it was filed as that, and then we had quite a few discussions. Since then, I've probably talked to eight or 10 different solar companies about what their thoughts were and why and what. And the answer is that had everything from we're currently negotiating with the schools and have contracts and the communities that we're not going to pay tax. So could that number be wrong? I wouldn't argue that number might be too high.
Right, but so it sounds like you'd be amenable to going lower on that one. Just
we've had a lot of negotiations on that.
yeah.
And again, a lot of those negotiations are based upon basing it on what the solar panel rating is and then so much per megawatt.
The way some of these farms are working now, maybe this is for another question, another witness later on, are they coming in and leasing the ground on that 40-year lease to place the solar panels?
Yes, they are. Some of them own it, but most of them are leasing.
And so then obviously they're working with the local landowner to make that decision to lease that ground.
They're working with a local landowner to lease that ground. They're contractors with him, and I'm fine with that. That's a, again, property rights issue. They ought to be able to do with the land what they want to do.
Would you say if this were to go forward that it could potentially halt a lot of new construction and development, and then we'd be picking a loser on the landowner side?
I would say if it goes forward, there are some people who plan to pay no taxes that might choose not to come here. I think there's a lot of people who would choose to come here in some manner because we're ideal because of the systems. And I've thought quite a bit about that, and I don't think that long. There are some who don't have contracts who said, well, we won't come here on that premise.
Right. I just, because I'm running this through my head that, I do have some marginal fields that I'm like, oh, there's some nice big transmission lines over here. This might be perfect to make this.
And it is, but it's not only transmission lines. It requires a substation or to put a substation in. Now,
that I've learned also.
Some of the 2,000-acre ones my understanding is they're going to put substations in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I like what you're trying to do. I get it. If it's at zero now, I feel like we do need to get to somewhere. I'm just curious on the final landing spot. Yeah. Thank you.
Representative McCreary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, actually, David, could you move over to the right a little? Thank you. I sat on the Wind Energy Task Force, and we met and had countless discussions over a span of a couple of years to come to that number. So I'm a bit uncomfortable with this just being put out there because there was a lot of input and there were some really tough discussions and compromises that came out of the recommendations and what the legislature agreed to. So at the very least, I'm not comfortable with this just picking something based on some other task force's work because they are different things. So so one of the questions I have has to do with really how this is going to impact customers, people that ultimately are going to be using this solar energy. So, anytime you're increasing taxes, which this is a tax increase, I'm assuming you guys didn't sign the Grover Norquist No New Taxes pledge. So, okay, well, so this is a new tax, and it's going to be it's a tax that's allowable to be passed through to consumers, which means people's bills are going to go up. So how do you justify the consumer of that power having their utility rates go up, their electricity rates going up?
In this country, we're making choices all the time on what we want to do. when we made choices to have certain percentage of our energy come from green energy, that's a choice. And that choice was made, it should have been made with the knowledge that the new energy may not be the same cost as the old energy, because it won't be. It isn't. And because of that, somewhere it has to be passed along. And again, where there's reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I understand that fully.
Right, but this cost isn't about a source of energy costing more or less to produce. This is about a tax on physical equipment. So that's a different discussion, I think. You know, I'm really uncomfortable. You know, we had a cold spell. We're getting ready for another cold spell. We all get phone calls from people. We see all these fundraisers going on to help people pay their heating bills and stuff. And here we are thinking about passing some legislation that's going to increase people's utility rates. And you know, that makes me quite nervous.
Let me ask you the flip side. How would you correct this then? How would you?
Well, I'm a big
make it
believer in the
equitable?
free market, and I'm uncomfortable with if we put a tax increase on this thing, we're basically picking a winner or loser, and we're not letting the free market. We're getting in the way of a property owner's ability to decide what can or cannot happen on their property. And so, you know, if we were to pass this, it would have, I mean, we might as well say goodbye to solar in the state of Missouri, because they're going to go to a state that's not so hostile. This is quite a increase.
Such as Illinois, maybe?
Hey, I don't know. The sun shines all over the place.
I mean, they have taxes, by the way. So, I mean, the question is.
I'm not going to get into a geographical discussion as much as, you know, this land, I want Missouri farmers to have a lot of options. And, you know, I worry that if we put something in at 37.5%, companies are just going to say, we're going to go someplace that wants us.
Hi, I'd like to answer this a little bit. Like I said earlier, we had a solar bill 2 years ago, and Warren County basically had about 5,000 acres. And what they ended up doing, they ended up going through a permitting process where actually the tax would be very similar to what the permit fee would be. So those two companies now have product going up, and they're selling products, so they're able to do that. So I think it's something that can be done. Everybody has a business. I know you're a public school supporter, and a lot of this is trying to support public schools, so we don't want to pick a loser in our public schools. So I definitely want to make sure to bring that point up. So we have a situation where we had two companies that actually made it work with their business plan. And I've been in business a long time. I've been, you know, involved with a lot of other business through the years. Most business plans, you're going to figure out there's a certain amount of responsibility that you have to be good stewards for your community, to be a part of that community, and paying taxes for your public schools is part of your business plan. If it's not, I mean, I don't understand where you're coming then.
Well, but the example you just gave shows that there's not a need for the legislature to get involved. It sounds like the county worked it out with the businesses. So,
and I agree with that. Like I said in part of my statement earlier, if you had planning and zoning, some of these areas do not have planning and zoning, so they're behind the eight ball. So a lot of these companies are going to these areas where they don't have that in place. So fortunately, Warren County had that. Montgomery County is kind of going through a lot of that process now, which is really slowing a lot of the process up to try to create some kind of agreement. So by being proactive and trying to have an agreement ahead of time, it makes things easier for the solar companies to know, all right, this is what we expect. This is the kind of tax we're going to have to do. Then they can have that in their model. So I think that's going to actually streamline it, where 2 years ago, we had to go through a lot more hoops, and now we're still going through that and slowing the process down for the green energy, which I think is what we need to be working on.
well, I do too, but I think, you know, adding this 37.5% tax to something is not the way to go about it. I'm really, really concerned about that. So,
And it's up for negotiation.
Thank you.
Representative Hicks. Proceed.
Okay, gentlemen, I've already had to make the mistake of voting on a tax for gas. And now you want me to do this on something that's solar? I'm sorry, I'm having some issues with this, especially at such a high tax rate. I mean, we're going to push billions of dollars out of this state because of that, I think. And then the other problem I have with this is we're taxing the sun, basically. This is supposed to be green, free energy, things like that. And I mean it. I already feel bad for voting on the gas tax. That's one I wished I could take back. I'm going to have a hard time swallowing voting on this. I mean, the elephant in the room is, as a Republican, is we want less taxes. And guys, Explain this to me, please.
All right, do we want to take all the taxes we have on nuclear off? Because there's taxes on nuclear. Do you want to take it off?
I could see us doing that. I could see us actually dropping the taxes on nuclear as well. It's one of the cleanest energies we have. Yeah, I would take it off.
And should one form of energy have an economic advantage to others?
Why does it not have a 30% tax now, or 37% tax now?
Because of the bill in 2013 said they were exempt, and it was because of solar panels on the houses. And in 2013, we weren't talking about 2,000-acre farms. We were talking about, if anything, maybe 20 or 30 on a hillside or on your house. And it was a representative, but it did not go through committee. It was the last week of session, and it came over as an amendment, and it did not go through the commission and vetting as it normally would.
I mean, I can see as we drive up to the Capitol from my district, I can see where they're putting in these new solar fields right now. And so we're going to start taxing these things is what you're saying. We're going to start taxing these solar. I guess some of the problems I'm having is this energy is supposed to be some of the cheapest energy around anyway because it's natural. We can take it, right? Okay. And now we're going to go and we're going to tax this. Who's paying for the taxes on this? We are going to, the consumer.
That's correct.
That's okay.
That is correct, is that as a society, when we pick things, who's going to pay for the schools in these districts and the roads in these districts where these reside? Who's going to make up for the difference in tax base for the businesses that go out because we've given all this land to for this purpose? There's a change. There's going to be a loss of tax base in these counties over these issues because they're not going to make up for the people that are already working there, buying it, hauling it, processing it.
I'm not the biggest opponent of solar and wind and dam energy and all of that, but at the same time, this is a growing. It's growing in our state, and it's doing quite well from what I can see. And now we're going to go and put a tax on it of up to, I guess, 37%. I heard you did say it's negotiable.
That's the assessed valuation on it. That's assessed valuation. That's not tax. That's establishing the assessed valuation of facility, and then it would be based upon the tax that each county has.
Okay. Well, we're on the same team here. I'm not going to beat up on you about this. Maybe we can talk offline, or maybe some of these witnesses may be able to convince me on this. But I'm just letting you know right now, I'm letting the committee know that, look, I already made a mistake once on voting for a gas tax. I admit it freely. I'm on camera. I made a mistake there. I don't want to do it again when it comes to taxes. We're taxing enough, and I think this is an industry that is starting to grow quite well in our state. I think we're going to start seeing some benefits from it. And I think if we put a 37% tax on it, we're going to push millions of dollars out of here.
Okay, who would be in a factor if it's not taxed? We'd have a lower rate for...
we have a lower rate now. We add 37% on it. The ratepayer is going to pay for that tax.
Yes, but where is...
Just like in gas.
But where is that going? It's going to the developers of the farms. Don't forget, they already have major federal subsidies to do this. So it's not a free enterprise.
So you're wanting a piece of the pie.
Well, it's not, it's already, we say it's not, it's already, we are already subsidizing it right now with the tax. We're paying for it with our tax dollars to develop wind. We are, so if we're doing
one of my problems with it.
Yeah, and again, so it's not, if we said it's a free market, hey, that's one thing, but none of these are exactly free markets.
This one's definitely not going to be. All right, well, we'll
Representative
talk
Hayden.
offline, gentlemen. I don't want to beat the horse, but we'll just talk offline.
Okay, I think I've seen some language that you're going to make some changes. Do you want to discuss some of those?
We have some language that will be in a House substitute coming up. Some of it protects the homeowners, so they would not be, their solars would not be taxed. There's some other issues we're looking at that would be in the House substitute.
Okay, and we look forward to seeing that. Let's move on to testimony from witnesses. How many people are here to testify on this bill? Okay, we will start with in favor and then just alternate. If you guys can keep your testimony to 3 to 4 minutes, that would really help to get everybody heard.
afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Trent Watson, registered lobbyist here on behalf of Missouri Association of Counties. And I want to kind of give a little bit of context. I don't want to go into too much of a history lesson. But 4 years ago, we had an issue come up where Ameren was going to buy a wind farm up in Atchison County, right? And Ameren was centrally assessed. So when the centrally assessed goes back, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, goes back to the state, and then it's redistributed by how many miles you have of Ameren power. Well, Atchison County had like 2 miles of Ameren power lines, so they weren't going to see any of this money back. So we changed the statute to where if, no matter who owns that wind farm, they are centrally assessed and that tax dollars stay local. So through that process, then we created this task force that Representative McCreary, Representative Fitzwater sat on, because the power companies, whether they were the IOUs or the private developers, wanted certainty across the state. So no matter what county they were in, they knew they were going to be treated the same. Okay? So now we're seeing these wind farms that are popping up, and they're having to do sort of the same thing. They go into the counties and they make a deal because they have to cross our county roads. They have to, they're not a private or a public utility. They have to get permission to make these, to cross these county roads. So instead of having this patchwork, we looked at, okay, well, this is what we already did with wind. It seemed to be pretty successful. So that's why we took and just said, okay, let's do wind and solar and treat them the same. I ran that past a few people that were key in passing the wind bill, and they said, absolutely, they saw the two need to be treated the same. Now, I've got a couple county commissioners, I've got an assessor up here that to answer any real technical questions and get into what they've gone through in their counties to bring solar in. I think a lot of the opposition is to the assessment. I mean, we dropped the assessment down to obsolescence of 37, and then that sits. If we want to look at it a different way of figuring this out, let's do it. You can hear from one of the commissioners about how they did it in their county. I mean, we're open to it. Here's what we want: we want them all treated the same, and when they're taxed, that tax dollar stays local. And I'm happy. That's kind of my lesson on that, or statement on that, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions for the witness? Representative Fitzwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was a part of that conversation negotiating for the windmills, and it was important to that local community to keep the dollars local and not go into that big pool of dollars that is shared across the state, which is what the nuclear power plant in just outside of my district and the representative from the Hayden district, but most of the employers are mine. It's very important. That money goes into a pool and then it's spread across all school districts in the state. Well, it wasn't fair for Atchison County for that one windmill farm to have to deal with throwing all of their local tax dollars in a pool, and so that was an important change. Secondly, we have assessors around the state, some which are hands-off and some which are very hands-on. Some of them want to go out and they want to assess a property and be very aggressive and say, I know everything about this and I'm going to tax it to the full extent that I have the authority to tax it. When there's no framework to do so, they will go do that. There are other assessors that won't do anything, won't have any framework, and just kind of pass it off, and it'll be what it will be, which is okay. But without some standardization of the process, you don't have a way to ensure that this is fair across the state. So you have one assessor in Callaway County that says we're going to get aggressive. You have another assessor in Montgomery that says we're not going to be aggressive. And so there's not certainty within the market for these companies to decide, I'm going to come to Missouri, but as it is right now, we could change the law at any point. They can install their facilities, and then 2 years later, we could say, listen, this is not okay with us. We're going to come in and get really aggressive on property taxes. So it's the problem is that there is no standard for taxing solar farms. We actually exempt it, so they're actually getting a carve out now. We need to come up with some standard that sets a significant rate that is a standard, so everybody's treated on the same playing field in the state of Missouri. And if the number is too high, let's talk about it. I'd even would decrease for windmills, but I've talked more about windmills than I ever want to in my entire career up to this point. Now I've got to do it on solar farms. But I think it's important to talk about the policy of standardizing this so that people have sustainable understanding of what they're up against in the future on policy. And those companies don't have that right now. They have a great system where they're not taxed, but But that's not going to last. Local jurisdictions are going to come in and do their own thing if we don't set like a standardized system.
And we looked at it as, okay, well, if it worked well for wind, let's try it out for solar. And, you know, why reinvent the wheel and go through that 4 years of pain all over again if we didn't have to? But.
And they're very different. So I think at a task force, let's talk about it. Let's look through all those things. Let's figure out how we make a standard way to do it for solar if that's what we're up against and that's what's needed. But this conversation has got to be had because this is an important issue, and standardization is very important on this issue.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Ritchie.
Inquiry.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question. I honestly don't know the answer to this question, so hopefully you can shed some light on it. My assumption, my operating assumption is that the wind farms are often operational in contexts where the land is still agriculturally utilized, to where they're running cattle, they're, doing whatever. So the way that wind farms are assessed in terms of the land would be agricultural, and in these solar farms, that land would not be able to be agriculturally utilized and is, in my understanding, often assessed at a commercial rate. So is there a disparity at that point that needs to be acknowledged, at least in that respect, that locals are able to derive a greater benefit on the assessment of land for property taxes with solar when compared to wind, and they are able to assess wind greater on equipment than they are solar, and does that produce a wash?
Not to completely avoid your answer, but I've got an assessor back here that would probably be a lot better at answering that question than me, sir.
But have the body that you represent, have those conversations been had in terms of the way in which those properties are assessed differently? I mean, I can wait. But I don't want to. You don't have to respond if you don't honestly know. But that's something that I'm interested in. And
we will have somebody to answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Representative McCreary.
Thank you. So one of the things that was a little bit different with wind is, it was described to me by our colleagues that live in that area, is there are very few places in the state that you could have a wind farm like that. Unlike this discussion with solar farms. And the other thing was that they're so visually, unavoidable that one of the reasons for why the tax money should stay local is because folks have to sort of deal with the visual clutter of the windmills being in their community. So that there are some differences, I will just say. And I agree with Representative Fitzwater that we have to figure something out. But I'm not sure this was like the right place to start necessarily. So, I look forward to talking to some of your members to figuring out how this actually works. But I mean, is there any concern that that we're just going to chase an industry out of the state?
Well, I mean, certainly that's not the goal. You would think by giving them some certainty that no matter whether they're in Atchison County or Callaway County, that they're treated the same, and that whether you look at a kilowatt hour as how you charge them or what the capacity is for that, I think it's just a discussion we need to have.
Okay.
And we just thought, with all the work on wind, it was just a good place to start.
I get that. I'm worried about the companies have a lot of other places to go for something like this, and I want to make sure we're not putting Missourians at a disadvantage. So, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. We will have a witness in opposition to the bill now.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jeremy Lefevre, and I'm here today on behalf of the Clean Grid Alliance. The Clean Grid Alliance has 48 members throughout the Midwest that are developers and contractors and consumers. You can learn more about them at cleangridalliance.org. Our member companies have to date invested somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 to $3 billion in Missouri's economy. That's local projects that fuel the local economies and also fuel the energy of tomorrow's economy. And in that production, we pay a number of taxes. Of course, we pay landowner payments, and those are taxed. We pay income tax payments on any income that is generated in the state, as well as any staff that are in the state. We pay property tax on any fencing or any material or any devices that are used that are not in the realm of that production. Right now, if you look at MISO and look at the pipeline, we've got roughly 8,000 megawatts of projects in the pipeline. Now, those are projects that are in the MISO pipeline. Not every single one of those projects is going to be developed, but an industry rough standard is, I think it was Representative Ritchie maybe asked the question of how many megawatts are generated by these plants. It's roughly 150 megawatts. And a 150 megawatt project is roughly $165 to $180 million investment. Again, remember, we're not going to build all of the 8,000 megawatts of projects, but if you do the rough math on that, you'll find out the number is 8.8 to $9.6 billion worth of investment. And that is investment that is planned based on the certainty that we have in the environment today. A massive 40% tax increase would send a wave throughout the industry where certainly those 8,000 megawatts would all go away. The current existing projects hopefully would be grandfathered in and would continue to be able to exist, but our member companies don't see a viable economic way to proceed with that sizable of a tax. And I think it's important. We've talked about a little bit the difference between wind and solar. A lot of times we talk about, there's coal and there's nuclear and hydro, and then we say wind and solar. It's important to remember that while sometimes wind and solar developers are one and the same, many of them are natural gas developers, and they work in transmission for oil and gas and a number of other things. Wind and solar are very, very different. It's a different financing mechanism. It's a different resources and different things that are used to produce that electron. And so the amount of energy, the amount of resource that is used to produce one electron through wind and one through solar is so very different. Same way with gas and all the other ways. And we have states that tax it through the amount that is produced or the value of the equipment or a whole host of things. But that needs to be looked at over a fairly long process with very smart people, much smarter than me, understanding the exact analysis of what it takes to produce an electron and what is a fair return on that rate. Because like I said, right now we are producing tax in the state and we are investing billions of dollars into the state's workforce. Solution time. We recognize that the solar industry is not going to have a tax exemption on our property forever. We recognize that, but we also recognize that to create a viable environment that supports the economic development that that my members support, we need a process that really over a longer period of time and with deeper analysis to really look and make sure that we're getting this right, so we're not killing an industry that is bringing a lot of opportunity for Missouri communities. Be happy to answer some questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Questions for the witness, Representative McCreary.
Do you happen to have the bill in front of you?
I do not. I apologize.
Okay. Could someone? So one of the discussions this afternoon on this bill is this idea that there needs to be certainty so that everything is like uniform across the state. Mm-hmm. But the way the bill is written is it says, notwithstanding the provisions, solar energy systems constructed for exclusive use of a single property may be exempt at the discretion of the assessor. So the way the bill's written, there's not even certainty anyway. It says may be exempt. So there's still, the way I'm reading the bill is there's still a ton of uncertainty because it's at the discretion of the county assessor. So we're not actually, if the way the bill's written, we're not providing any certainty at all. We're giving the county assessor the ability to say,
I think there still is some uncertainty with that provision. I mean, certainly this would say you got 37 and a half unless the assessor comes in and says something different. I will say,
right.
So I obviously do the government affairs stuff for the alliance, but I also work for a number of the member companies on the community development projects. And every project I've been on, we have done a voluntary contribution agreement, a community contribution agreement, a pilot, whatever it is. And so we are investing whatever those are, and that is a negotiated amount, just like we would negotiate with an assessor. And sometimes they end up negotiating with a school district, where a school district says, you know, we would like X, Y, and Z, and that will help us, whether it's a science lab. I think in Kansas we helped build a career tech ed lab to understand how wind is developed at the high school level. Now that's something that the company and the school district and the locals could negotiate together, because that's what they wanted and that's what the area wanted. And then we were, you know, the company was brought in with open arms and everybody was really happy. This would be more difficult to accomplish that, because the community has less leverage, because there's, you know, we can come in and kind of like when you give it the United Way, you say, I gave it the office and I'm done giving now. So I think that it's a solid point you bring up, lady.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Witness in favor of the bill now.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Alan Winders. I am the presiding commissioner with Audrain County, Missouri. I'm here to testify in favor of the bill because of two basic pillars that we think are very important. That the taxation field should be leveled in as much as this should be taxed as is wind, although not necessarily at the same rates or anything else, but it needs to be taxable. And the second part is that it remains locally assessed, locally taxed and locally assessed, that it doesn't go into that pool of state assessment. Right now, different as has been pointed out, different counties are cutting different deals. I can hit a driver in a wedge to a county that, as I understand it, is going to receive nothing for their schools from the solar farm development in their county. And hit it in a different way, it might take a driver in a 3-iron to get to a county that is going to receive, as I understand it, $2,350 per megawatt capacity from theirs, which will obviously benefit the schools. And that is, I think, in the form of fees, not in the form of a payment in lieu of taxes. We would not consider this bill a 40% increase on tax, because it's really making it subject to property taxes. Now, at what rate the property tax should be there, I'm not sure, and I'm not prepared to really even address that, except that it should be the same throughout the state. I believe that the industry wants that too. The developers that we've talked to haven't talked about tax certainty. They've talked about the uncertainty in the tax environment in Missouri, and I certainly can't speak for them, but I can tell you that that's my experience in speaking with developers, and we've talked to 2 in Audrain County so far. The obvious biggest beneficiary is the school system, assuming that a payment in lieu of taxes is distributed in the same way that property taxes would be. And the system we have right now, the benefits to school kids depends upon the negotiating skills of the county commission. And we feel like it would be much better if it were standardized. Take some of the kids should benefit the same, no matter what sophistication level the county commission has in terms of these negotiations. We have experience on 2 levels dealing with developers, and the one developer we actually have an agreement to make a payment in lieu of taxes. They believed they believed that taxation would come, and what they needed to move their project forward was certainty. We suggested to wait and see what was going to happen with the legislature, and in order to move their project forward, they said, no, we want to make a deal, make payments in lieu of taxes, so that they can get their investors, so they can move forward with their project. We agreed to a payment based on the capacity of the facility. So the way we figured it, and it was with their help because they did both wind and solar, the way we figured it was that wind was taxed at about $6,000 a megawatt. So looking at what, based on, of capacity. So in terms of capacity, the same megawatt capacity in solar was probably worth about 1/3 of that. So in our agreement, we're at about $2,000 a megawatt for solar, and we've also have an agreement with a wind developer that they'll just follow the state standards, but we expect that to be about $6,000. And like you said, at one point, wind was never going to be anywhere except northwest Iowa. Well, now it's in northwest Missouri, and they are now in Audrain County. So the other experience we have was with the developer that suggested that there were no taxes possible on solar, and that if they bought the ground, it would go to state assessed. So in that case, we're looking at taking Audrain County's first in soybeans and second in corn production, typically in the state. In that case, we were going to take 400 acres out of that production. Whatever taxes they did pay would be state assessed, and there wouldn't be any payment for the physical structures, for the property that either personal or real, that would be the solar structures. That's not a deal that's good for our county or for our kids. We would much rather have that land in production than have it in those circumstances. We are in favor of the bill. I think that our experience is not unusual. I think that generally the wind developers, the county commissioners that I've talked to, generally the wind developers understand that there needs to be some contribution to the local school districts and are willing to make it. But we absolutely think that it should be driven by a standard by the state, set by the state.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you for the golf references. Representative Ritchie.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. It seems to me, in listening to your testimony, that there is a way at the local level to arrive at negotiated terms.
Yes, sir, there is.
Okay. Second question, the original owner of the property that sells to a solar farm entity, it would really kind of be more up to that individual owner to determine who purchases the property and what is done with that property subsequent to their ownership. You had mentioned the fact that you guys as a county would rather keep those 400 acres in soybean production or what have you. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's a property owner that makes it, I'm going to sell my property and I'm going to sell it to the solar entity that wants to buy it. Right. So, I mean, that's kind of and I understand what you're saying. I mean, because you're looking at that as a revenue producer for the county in terms of the taxation element, but that isn't necessarily something that I would say is going to move the needle for me personally, because that's a contractual issue between a land owner that's selling land to a purchaser, and quite frankly, they don't necessarily have any obligation to determine their sell on what anyone else would like to have that land used for, unless you're wanting to buy the land from them at a better price. The question I'd asked earlier on the assessment of the land itself, how does your county address that? Are you changing the zoning of that land in a way to where it is now being assessed at a commercial rate if they're not able to farm it?
Yes, yes, sir. And just to clarify, I would personally, not we, as a personal opinion, would rather have the land in Audrain County in production of corn or soybeans than solar if it's going to be state assessed and there's no property tax on the solar part at all. So if a landowner wants to sell or lease their property to a developer, and if it's going to be locally assessed and it will be taxable, I have absolutely no problem with that. In fact, we don't even have county zoning in Audrain County, so we're very much in support of landowner rights. And if I indicated otherwise, I apologize. It was an error. What the main reason for that is not about tax revenue. However, it's about creating wealth and farm wealth if it stays in production. If it's not going to provide any benefits to the school system in terms of taxes, and it's out of production, then it's really a net loss for all of us in the county. That's what I meant. In terms of the way things are taxed, I understand from our assessor that if a windmill sets on a quarter acre, that quarter acre will be assessed commercially. That's my understanding. If a solar farm sets on 1,000 acres, that 1,000 acres will likely be assessed commercially.
Okay, so
now, there are people here that know more about that. I probably outkicked my coverage in terms of assessment at that point.
Yeah. So, but would it be safe for someone that is a non-subject matter expert on these discussions? It seems to me that the county still comes out ahead if you have 400 acres being assessed at a commercial rate compared to, I mean, you kind of bundle up all the windmills in a particular, 1,000-acre tract, and you've got, I don't know, 10 acres that's going to be assessed as commercial. And I don't know if my numbers are accurate, though, just for kicks, right? It seems to me that there's still a benefit to county assessment based on that one detail alone that moves the needle to where no matter what we're doing on assessing equipment, commercial assessment rates are quite a bit more than ag land, at least in most counties that I'm aware of.
That's accurate.
So anyway, that's the conundrum I'm facing on this question, because it's been stated already. I get the idea of fairness, but part of the resolve to arriving at something that's fair is the ability to locally negotiate terms. And if that is in play, then I'm going to probably be leaning toward not doing a whole lot here. So now there will be others that will be testifying that may correct that assumption I have. Maybe in their county they can't negotiate terms. I don't know. But anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time I've taken on that. So.
All right, thank you, sir. Let's move on to the next witness in opposition to the bill.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jared Pitts. I'm a project director with TAXATION. TAXATION is one of the larger privately held companies in the U.S. That has a history of developing power projects over the last 35 years. I'm here today to express my opposition to House Bill 1997 and 2167. TAXATION has developed and managed and operated over 22,000 megawatts of power projects over our history, which includes both natural gas, solar, wind, and energy storage projects. We currently have an operating wind project in Missouri, in Nottoway County, which is our Clear Creek Energy Center. We are currently developing a solar project in Scott County, Missouri, in southeast Missouri, in partnership with Arevon Energy. This project is a continuation of our work with Arevon developing projects in California, Indiana, Minnesota, and other states across the country. Local landowners in Scott County have agreed to lease their land with our project, which will host over 200 megawatts of solar, which is enough to power about 35,000 typical Missouri homes. The Kelso project offers local landowners a way to diversify their income and also preserve this land and their family for generations to come. The project will be returned to its agricultural use at the end of the project via decommissioning bond that the project will have in place. The Kelso project also benefits the local community. We hired an independent professor at the economics department at the Illinois State University based on a 200 megawatt Kelso solar project, and it's estimated to bring a local investment of over $175 million. Property taxes are estimated to increase in excess of $9 million, of which $6 to $7 million would go to local schools. I want to just reiterate that. Again, our project in Scott County is estimated to increase property tax revenues by over $9 million over the project life, of which $6 to $7 million would go to local schools. The project would also create 230 full-time jobs during construction and 82 of those jobs would be estimated to stay locally in Scott County. And from a GDP perspective, there would be about a $10 million increase in the county's GDP during construction, and during each year of operation, a $1 million increase in GDP per year. Solar projects in Missouri are not exempt from all property taxes and are currently supporting local communities by paying real property taxes on the underlying land that would be going from agricultural assessment to commercial assessment. Additionally, certain project improvements such as roads and fences would not be exempt, so there would be additional property taxes paid on those improvements as well. Tenaska and Arevon have an expansive list of projects that we're developing, and it would not have included our Scott County project without the 0% property tax on solar equipment, as this was a very key consideration for us when we decided to invest and start developing this project 2 to 3 years ago. Arevon and Tenaska are exploring other sites in Missouri for future solar projects that would bring similar investments and economic activity to the state and local communities. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I want to be clear that this property tax bill would significantly harm our projects both in the near term and long term. In the near term, we're currently negotiating a contract with an energy buyer that these property taxes would kill that deal. Additionally, long term, Missouri would be signaling to other businesses that this is a tough environment to do business. We would certainly make Missouri a lesser of a priority and focus our efforts on other states that would be more competitive for us to develop such projects in. So I would encourage you to please not pull the rug out from under our feet here and under our business, and allow us the opportunity to invest millions of dollars in your state. So thank you. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, sir. Representative Fitzwater. And sir, can I ask that you speak right into the mic? They're having trouble hearing you online.
Thanks for being here. So you said you're in a bunch of other states. Do you have any idea what the tax rates are in the other states? What are you up against with other projects in other states? You mentioned California. I think you said Indiana, Minnesota.
That's correct. So in California, I know there's a property tax exemption on projects in California.
A zero, just, do you pay no property taxes at all in California?
That's to my knowledge, yes.
Okay.
Some of the other projects that I mentioned that we're in partnership with Arevon on, like in Minnesota, I'm not involved with developing those projects, so I don't have the details on what property taxes would be there. But I do know, in terms of assessing what the impact of this bill would do to increasing property taxes, it would be, well in excess of what we're seeing on other projects.
Okay. Well, so what if the sponsors got in a room with you all or with the interest and came up with some idea how to standardize the assessment, the way we do assessments for solar in the state? Would that be, and from your perspective, from your company, would that be beneficial going forward so you have some stability, or is that, any increase would be detrimental to you guys wanting to do projects in the state of Missouri and you'd rather negotiate locally?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think we were able to work locally in our project in Scott County and get comfortable with the assessor and the commissioners there on our project and how the project would be assessed under the current rules. And again, we're seeing a significant increase in property taxes just from the underlying land and some of the other project improvements that would not be exempt. But I think certainly, if it's a statewide discussion, if there's a consensus that there should be some committee to look at this, we would certainly encourage a committee approach to really study this and make sure that the outcome is what is desired and not some, I'll call it, arbitrary number that hasn't been assessed and evaluated.
And I certainly think I think the sponsors in particular, because we have the Representative Hayden, he does the other northern half of Callaway County, and I have a section of the south half of Callaway County. We both have projects in both areas of our districts. We want to come to some conclusion that doesn't say, please go away. That's not what we're trying to do. But I think there's some validity to trying to ensure there's some stability so these local assessors aren't having to figure it out on their own and working through, maybe people that do understand it. So appreciate your time. Thanks for your testimony.
Representative Hicks.
Gentlemen, you heard my concerns if you were in the audience at the time about the 37%. I mean, I know it can be played with, and we'll talk about that offline with the sponsors of the bill. But currently, you said you have projects going in Missouri, or have had?
Yeah, we have a operating wind project in Missouri, and then we're in advanced development of a solar project.
What's
Missouri.
that wind one taxed at? Do you know?
So the equipment on the wind project, to my knowledge, is assessed at the 37.5%. But I think as the conversation gravitated towards, there's a big difference between the amount of underlying real estate in a solar project.
Yeah, I
versus a
actually
wind
like the
project.
point that was brought up, how one piece of land can still be used and the other cannot.
Correct. I spoke with some of my colleagues that developed the wind project here, and from a high level, it was roughly a 200 megawatt project would have about 100 acres assessed commercially. That would be the areas where there's wind turbines. So for a 200 megawatt project, there would be roughly 100 acres that would go from agricultural to commercial assessment. As compared to our solar project, we're estimating somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 acres that would go from agricultural to commercial assessment. So there's about 15 to 20 times of additional land that would be going into commercial assessment.
Is this tax rate going to affect the business being done in the state?
Absolutely.
The decision, I should say, of doing business in our state.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Ritchie, and then we'll move on to the next witness.
Thank you. So what you just said, it would stand to support what I was initially kind of thinking. Solar is land intensive, whereas wind is not. So, and I honestly think, I get it and I understand that there's a need for, in taxation, for there to be fairness. None of us, well, I'll just speak for myself, I don't like picking winners and losers. I think that's bad tax policy. There is a need for the ability for any industry to be able to plan and have some continuity and some stability. But I honestly think that there's a long way that we've got to go to negotiate some details here. Because in my estimation, what we're looking at is a very land-intensive operation that is going to be taxed at a significant rate compared to wind production. Wind production is being taxed in a way that solar is not. But I've got questions. How does that come out in the wash? Are we looking at a solar opportunity still ending up paying more in taxes than the wind because of the land-intensive component? So if we're going to create a scenario where we're going to start taxing equipment, and I honestly, when I heard that projects like yours, we tax fences. To me, I'm like, what in the world? We are way in the weeds in terms of taxing authorities going after anything possible to tax in order to be able to secure revenue if we're taxing fences. But that needs to be stopped, I think, personally. But that's not the point of the bill. If we were to honestly look at trying to come up with some kind of workable solution, I'm thinking we need to then statewide reduce the commercial assessment rate of solar property so that there's at least an offset there to where there's not an overall tax increase. We have stability, we have continuity, but we're not increasing taxes. We're just simply saying if we're going to do this, we're going to do it in a way that is fair, but the commercial assessment then statewide on solar land needs to be reduced statewide. Those are just my thoughts. I don't know if you have any input on that, but would that become a part of any kind of negotiation that you think would be appropriate to consider?
Certainly. I certainly agree with you that solar is much more land intensive than a wind project, and that's a key factor that needs to be considered. I think when we look at our current project, bringing an incremental $9 to $10 million of property tax revenue, I think that's significant. If there's different, obviously different ways that you could get there, depending on how you're going about taxing the land or the equipment. But I think for us, the current structure is working for us on the projects that we're developing, and they seem reasonable. But certainly, the proposed bills of taxing the equipment would tip the scales to where these projects are no longer viable for us and economic relative to other regions we can develop in.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, in the interests of time, members, can I suggest that we will have the witnesses testify, and if you have a question, contact them offline unless it's something important that you want to ask them here, and then, because I think we're getting the narratives from both sides. And then we'll have everybody that wants to testify continue to testify. I would ask that maybe you keep your testimony 2 to 3 minutes, because I think the members are getting the narratives from both sides. So the next person in favor of the bill.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Bob Adams. I'm from Cape Girardeau County. I'm a county assessor. And I can assure you, assessors across this state want uniformity in the way we value things. It makes our lives so much easier to do that. The 37.5% that they're talking about is not a tax rate. It's a value. They're valuing the property at 37.5% of its cost. Then that is the basis for their assessed value to be applied to. Then, of course, commercial properties are assessed at 32%. So it would be 32% of 37%. And so you're not talking about levying a tax on somebody at 37.5%. That's not exactly what they're talking about. And from the assessment standpoint, we have every business in this state their assessment is based on, in theory, 90% to 110% of their market value. So when you create this subclass of valuation of 37.5%, you're creating an unconstitutional mandate for a subclass of real estate that does not exist in our statutes. So while I'm all for incentivizing solar and wind and any other industry that can enhance our state, I think it's a good idea. And how you do it, how you come up with it, I'm not your man. But but I want to tell you that assessors are looking at these things in a uniform way. We want to. And we'll look at whatever process you come up with. So I would like to answer a question or two if you got something that pertains to this situation.
I think we'll contact you offline if that's possible.
That's exactly
we have your
right.
contact information.
My phone number is on the sheet. I don't think I put my email address on there, but if you call and get it, we can converse any way you would prefer.
Okay. Thank you very much for being here today, sir. Next witness in opposition.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is James Owen. I'm the Executive Director of Renew Missouri, a nonprofit that works on clean energy issues in Missouri. As the bill is currently written, we are opposed to it. Our group, along with other people working in this area, have been working diligently with the sponsors of these bills to try to work out something. Because one thing I can tell you about the solar companies that I talk to on a daily basis in this job is they want to be good neighbors. They want to commit to their community. They are interested in that. As this is written, our concerns are, as what you've heard, is that this will have a chilling effect on businesses that are not only looking to Missouri, but are already here. And so, we're talking about the idea that this is going to start, being applied to businesses that have already decided to invest in Missouri, and that is going to be a problem in seeing those projects potentially shutter down, downgrade, as well as just dealing with the fact there's going to be people who are going to move elsewhere and not invest their money here. Also, I think it's important to point out, which I've not heard yet today, is that as this is written, this applies to people with residential solar systems. We're not talking about people who are making money selling this to the grid or selling this to utilities. We're talking about people like some of the solar customers I talk to who have used part of their retirement nest egg to put a solar array on their property, on their roof. This would apply to them as well, as written. I know that is a concern that's been addressed. It's a concern that we're going to continue working on. We hope that as part of your deliberations, you realize that is still going to be a reality for not just businesses who are doing this for a living and selling a lot of power, but this is also going to be affecting regular solar customers out throughout the state as well. And so with that, we would just say we're in opposition, and my cell phone number is on this witness sheet, so feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.
All right, thank you, sir. Next witness in favor of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gary Youngerman, Callaway County Presiding Commissioner. I'm just going to say this. It's kind of an informational piece / I'm in favor of the bill, but not maybe as the bill is presented. What I'd like for all of you to remember at one point is that there's 114 counties in the state. So I think it's 4 counties are charter, which have an executive director, basically. The rest of them have commissioners, 3 commissioners, okay? Very few of the counties have commissioners that work 5 days a week because they cannot afford to pay commissioners to work 5 days a week, okay? So they have commissioners that work a couple days a week, probably working for $25,000, $30,000 a year maybe. I think the whole point that's trying to be made by the people in favor of this bill, or the point I'm going to make, is this. Those commissioners that don't have time to be, these companies are coming in and negotiating with the county commissions to try to pay a payment in lieu of taxes, which is great. And those, for me, working 5 days a week have been somewhat fun, but also somewhat not, because some of the issues that I'm dealing with right now is some of the companies are wanting to pay X amount of dollars per megawatt. The other company wants to pay this amount per megawatt. I've got school districts. I'm a small county, 45,000 people. The south part of the county knows what the north part of the county is going to do before the north part of the county knows what they're going to do. So the issue is just treating everybody equally throughout my county and my school districts, okay? So I think there's a negotiation process here that can be had. Mr. Winders from Audrain spoke of the $2,000 per megawatt for those farms agreement that he had. I'm dealing with a situation where I'm over $500 apart per megawatt. And that's hard on a county commission to try to figure out where you're at here. You're trying to negotiate one up, or you're going to have to one down, and you feel like now you've left money out there that maybe another school district could have received. So I think what I'm trying to say here is I think it's a little bit your all's, I ain't going to say job, but you need to help us figure this out, because at the end of the day, there's negotiations going around all across the state. And we talk about local and wanting to do things locally, and we do. But the problem with this is it would be so much easier because of the lack of experience and everything else of trying to negotiate with solar companies out here with all these commissioners, that it would be much easier if they were just, this is the way it's going to be, no matter if you're going up in Callaway County, Audrain County, Scott County, Cass County, whatever the case may be, that there would be some sort of a playing field. And when you got these companies that are coming in and wanting to offer, you know, I've got one, I'll just give an example. I've got one coming in that's a 250 megawatt farm, okay? Thousands of acres out of production. But they're willing to pay $2,500 an acre. I got another one that's not willing to pay near that much. Well, you do that math, and the one is, that's over $600,000, okay? So we're talking about creating something. They're already willing to pay, and it's not out of what their business model has been formed at. So I want you all to just think about that as we move forward.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for being here today. Next witness in opposition to the bill.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jay Hahn. I'm here on behalf of Ranger Solar. Our principal was unable to be with you this evening, and I won't cover any additional material that's previously been covered. As drafted, we do oppose the bill. Ranger Solar actually had addressed these concerns, or attempted to address these concerns in many years prior to this legislative session, but here we are today. Ranger is on our business model for just the state of Missouri, slated to invest over $1 billion in solar assets deployed across many of the counties that have been mentioned recently. I can only parlay our experience, which is as a large-scale solar developer, we do value community relationships. So rather than we acknowledge the tax environment that exists, some of these things are in the courts, by the way. It is an honorable mention I haven't heard yet today. We do value our community relationships. So rather what we do is we listen to what the local community wants. We have been successful. Some of the projects I won't be able to disclose, but some of our projects I can mention. For instance, Warren County, we were able to negotiate, and this is the county's idea. We accepted the proposal, essentially a fee, a solar overlay district, which would be a fee in lieu of taxes. That was about the $2,500 per megawatt value. It seems to work for that project. We're able to bring that project forward and online. We're looking forward to our numerous other projects across Missouri. We have spoken with the sponsors of the bill, and we have mentioned some of the changes we would like to see that probably are a little bit more conducive to watching projects move forward in Missouri. We stand ready to have those conversations. Additionally, we would like to be mindful that legislation as drafted would likely prohibit or arrest our ability to move some of our projects forward. But with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. You guys can always contact me offline if you would like.
All right, thank you, sir. Are there any other witnesses in favor of the bill? Witness in opposition? Any other witnesses in opposition? Are there any witnesses for informational purposes only?
Good evening, Chair Patterson, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing us to testify for informational purposes today. My name is Joshua Mueller. I'm Deputy Director at Most Policy Initiative. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit group here in Jefferson City that writes policy briefs for members of both parties and chambers upon request. I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Tomi Granzier-Nakajima, who is our Energy and Environment Legislative Policy Fellow. He has written a brief about some big picture overview of solar energy and some considerations around how solar incentives relate to solar deployment. So I'm going to turn it over to him to discuss the research literature on this topic. Thanks.
All right, so as Josh said, my name is Dr. Tomi Granzier-Nakajima, and I'll just be covering some of the topics that I wrote about in a recent science note that we published. So first of all, solar energy generation is increasing in the United States. Currently, it accounts for about 3 to 4% of total U.S. Electricity generation. In Missouri, that number is about 0.6% of electricity generation. Further, utility scale solar electricity generation is increasing in proportion of total solar electricity generation. So for instance, in the U.S. in 2011, 32% of solar electricity was generated by utility scale projects. That number increased to 67% in 2020. In Missouri in 2020, utilities generated about 22% of solar electricity generation. And again, these numbers are expected to rise as time goes on. So solar panels have an approximately 25-year lifetime. That lifetime is a little bit ill-defined, but we can say approximately 25 years. That means some of the earliest solar panels are starting to be reach the end of their lifetimes. There's no federal decommissioning policies. However, 15 states have decommissioning policies for utility-scale solar farms. To give you some context about what other states are doing in terms of property tax exemptions, more than half of states have some form of a property tax exemption. This can take several forms. For instance, similar to Missouri, several states have exemptions for all solar energy systems. Some states authorize a property tax exemption, however, allow local authorities to determine whether or not to provide that exemption. This would be related to what is proposed in this bill, HB 1997. Further, with the rise in utility scale solar electricity generation, some states are considering different property tax exemptions for utility scale projects or residential projects. For instance, Colorado has statewide property tax exemptions for resident solar panels. However, they don't have the same statewide offering for a property tax exemption for utility scale projects. There has been research trying to investigate the effect of different types of solar incentives on residential solar deployment. Specifically, they find that on average, $1 of a solar incentive, and again, that includes all solar incentives, including sort of cash rebates or grants, including tax incentives. So for every dollar of these types of incentives, an additional 500 watts of additional installed solar capacity per 1,000 residential electric customers. In terms of solar incentives in general, cash incentives seem to be the most effective for increasing solar deployment, whereas property tax incentives have a relatively less impact on the deployment of solar panels. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your testimony. Did you say you have a written packet for us?
So we do. We've submitted this as written testimony, and then all of our policy briefs are available for free on our website, which is mostpolicyinitiative.org.
All right, thank you very much.
Great, thanks.
Any other witnesses for informational purposes only?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Rebecca Eichelberger with the Association of Missouri Electric Cooperatives. We are testifying in, for informational purposes only, but we do support new privately owned renewable energy farms being taxed and assessed locally, supporting those local communities, especially in rural areas. Unlike the investor-owned utilities, our 47 electric co-ops are locally taxed and assessed, and they always have been. So Thomas Hill Energy Center property taxes there are assessed and stay in Randolph County. Same with our distribution cooperatives and all of our transmission cooperatives, they pay local taxes. For-profit commercial wind farms, whether they're privately owned or investor-owned, as you guys know, they're assessed and taxed locally after the passage of House Bill 734 last year. Unlike the investor-owned utilities, the electric cooperatives do not own any wind farms, but we do buy, through a contract, 1,240 megawatts of wind energy, and we, of course, do support that those wind farms do pay are assessed and taxed locally. All of this is consistent with our fundamental cooperative principle to support our local communities that we're in. For-profit commercial solar farms, whether they are privately owned or whether they are investor-owned, are being planned in several areas of the state, of course, and we don't see any reason why those new commercial renewable energy operations should be treated any differently for tax purposes than for-profit wind farms, any differently than for-profit wind farms or our nonprofit rural electric cooperatives. We do understand that there may be some amendment language out there to better distinguish between commercial or residential solar projects or arrays, and we'd be happy to work with the bill sponsor on any language and any interested parties on that, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Thank you for being here today. Any other witnesses for informational purposes only? That will conclude the hearing on House Bills 1997 and 2167. We will move to Representative Taylor's House Bill 2120. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Representative, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Jared Taylor, State Representative, District 139, here to present to you House Bill 2120. I don't think I had the privilege of presenting in front of this committee this bill last year. It did pass out of committee and out of the body unanimously. This bill simply protects C4 organizations from having to disclose their donor information to government entities. This bill, so the Supreme Court ruled in the NAACP versus Alabama ruling that this is a First Amendment right, and that we should be protecting individuals who not only are associating with an organization, but also donating to an organization. Both are protected rights under the First Amendment. And the ruling in that said that there was concern over the economic reprisal, loss of employment, threat of physical coercion, and other manifestations of public hostility if the NAACP had to give over that information to the state of Alabama. And it's been ruled on other times by the Supreme Court. They've affirmed that decision, but that was kind of the base of it. There were a couple questions last year. We made some changes at the request of the Missouri Ethics Commission if there was an investigation into a nonprofit who was getting into the political environment, and so we made some of those changes in the bill last year, and you'll see it reflected in the bill. There was another change that was asked to be made by the Secretary of State last year toward the very end that we made that I forgot to include, so I do have an amendment that you all will see next week to include that language at the request of the Secretary of State, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Hafner.
To inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Proceed.
Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
Appreciate you bringing this forward. So I just want to bring up a couple of things, and I appreciate you bringing up the Supreme Court case. And I know you know this, but there was also one on July 1st of 2021 with the U.S. Supreme Court with Americans for Prosperity versus Bonta. And it dealt with some issues that were going on in California. And it's very applicable to this situation because people don't understand how out of control some of this is. And so just as a quick history, right now there's 25 states that are considering comprehensive privacy legislation because of the government overreach that's continuing to take place. 20 of those states have approved it. Now, there are multiple sources that say that number is still floating around. Missouri is way behind on this. We have got to get out in front of this, and I know that you were working on this last year, and I appreciate you doing it. Part of the argument is going to be here is what about transparency and accountability? And each one of these nonprofits is required to file that IRS Form 990, which goes through basically it's a condensed summary of their balance sheet, and they've also got to go through their governing bodies, management procedures, what they're paying independent contractors, and also the salaries of officers, directors, trustees, their highest compensated workers. And so this is not about transparency, the people that are fighting this. What you're doing is the right thing. It's all about government overreach. And in each one of these Supreme Court cases, it was extremely clear. The Supreme Court said it's a violation of the First Amendment principles, the foundational documents of our country. We need to protect our people.
Yeah, gentlemen, we've seen over the last several years specifically that, people are looking to get information out on their political enemies, whether it's the right or the left. I think we're both guilty of doing that because we want to know who's attacking us or who may disagree with us, maybe disagree with our principle. But I think it's important that we protect those rights across the board, no matter who's in power, to make sure that those rights are protected.
Yeah, gentlemen, and it's disheartening when you look at what California has done. So their attorney general enforced a state law that required nonprofits to disclose donors who donated $5,000 annually. That started in 2010. The court process is extremely slow, and I know you know this, but it took until July of 2021 for the Supreme Court to step in. And that over 10 years it took for the courts to get this through the process to make the right decision. So I appreciate you bringing us forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Further questions? Thank you. We will move on to witnesses. Witnesses in favor of the bill.
All right. Mr. Chairman, esteemed members of the committee, my name is Ryan Johnson. here on behalf of an organization called People United for Privacy. It's a national organization in scope, working with a broad coalition, bipartisan coalition, in the states to pass similar legislation. There are 10 states thus far who have passed similar legislation to Representative Taylor's bill. We appreciate Representative Taylor's leadership on this. Last year, when this went through a different committee, it went out of committee, I believe, unanimously, went out of rules unanimously. It passed the House near unanimously, save one no vote, I believe. So, again, we feel like this is a very bipartisan issue. The intent of the bill is to protect, again, really political speech in the form of donations to anything on the 501c schedule, per the IRS is 501. So that's C3s, that's C4s. HB 2120 will not impact Missouri's campaign finance laws in any way. Just want you to know that. Rather, the act will prevent public agencies from acting without legislative authorization to demand donor information. And this protection is crucial considering the developments elsewhere. We just heard about Representative Hafner, and I appreciate you bringing it up. On July 1st, 2021, the Supreme Court struck down a California donor disclosure law as facially unconstitutional in its decision in Americans for Prosperity Foundation versus Bonta. The law required nonprofits operating or soliciting contributions in California to disclose to the Attorney General of California information about all of its donors who contribute more than $5,000 each. Essentially, what they were requiring was that IRS Form 990, the Schedule B, and the Schedule B form for 501cs includes all donations itemized over $5,000. So a real infringement. And of course, he already mentioned NAACP versus Alabama from 1956. That was a seminal case in this case law, and I'll try to be quick. I won't read through everything given the time, and I appreciate your all's patience. We've all heard of cancel culture, and it goes both ways. And so you can imagine in an era that we currently live in that seems so polarized, from the left, if you are a Planned Parenthood donor working for a Catholic employer, you want maybe that donation to be kept between you and the organization that you donated to. On the right, similar, if you donate to the NRA and work for an anti-Second Amendment employer, but you want to keep your job, you don't want your information to necessarily be doxxed by a government agency. And so this bill does include some penalties also in case there are breaches, accidental disclosures as well as intentional disclosures, and that's what really gives the bill teeth. But again, this is really about freedom of political speech. This is a political speech bill. Some people talk about anonymous political speech, maybe being out of fashion, but I will remind the esteemed members of the committee that anonymous political speech is as old as our republic itself. The Constitution that both parties agrees to support and takes an oath to support and defend, of course, was not a foregone conclusion, as you might remember your history. It was our founders who wrote under pseudonyms the case for the passage of the Constitution state by state in these persuasive newspaper articles. So when you think about it, the founders who advocated for the passage of our Constitution state by state in the state legislatures advocated for it anonymously. So this is really baked into the system. Again, it's as American as, you might say, apple pie, and as old as the Republic itself. I'd be happy to take any of your questions, but I also understand that time is an interest here, and there are other people that want to testify.
Questions for the witness? Representative Ritchie.
Just real quick, and I could have asked the sponsor, but wasn't thinking about this initially because I heard the C4 component, but looking at this does hit C3s as well. Would this also capture the scenarios where early on in the pandemic, local authorities were trying to compel C3s to hand over lists of people participating who may be attending? Like, for instance, I mean, I'm a pastor. Right. I was told at one point that I was going to have to hand over a list of people to the local authorities, those who were in attendance, and I said, No.
Right, yeah.
I mean, that's our information. That does not go anywhere for, whatever. This language would prohibit that kind of thing too. Yes.
As far as I understand it, yeah. I mean, it's a quick read. It's about a page and a half bill.
Right. I mean,
I read it again before the hearing, and it specifically prevents public entities from disclosing and or doxing that public information and making it public. So yes, you would not have to turn over a list of your donors per se, or your attendees,
participants
who tithe, or
and
participants,
supporters, whatever. Yeah. Well, that's what I was reading.
This
But just
bill is to provide that kind of protection.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Thank you, sir. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Witness in opposition to the bill? Are there any witnesses in opposition? Next witness in favor, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jeff Smith, representing the American Civil Liberties Union. Life takes some unexpected twists and turns, and in that vein, I find myself here testifying in support of my friend, Representative Taylor's bill. I'm glad we can be on the same side. So look, so there's a reason that the First Amendment protects associational privacy. People who fear that they'll be subject to threats and harassment and reprisals if their associations are publicly revealed by the government, whether intentionally or totally inadvertently, will be chilled naturally from exercising their First Amendment rights. We saw it happen inadvertently here, through state government last fall. We don't want anything like that to happen again, and this legislation would prevent state government from sweeping up and potentially revealing nonprofits' sensitive donor information. We're very grateful for the sponsors' efforts and tenacity in refiling this bill, and with that, happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, sir. Questions for the witness? All right, thank you. Next witness in favor of the bill.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. My name is Jeremy Cady. I'm the State Director for Americans for Prosperity. I want to thank you for having us here today. I did file my information online, so you should hopefully have that as well. And we want to go on record in support of this legislation. Representative Hafner, thank you very much for your comments. Transparency is for government, privacy is for people, and we agree with that. Freedom of association is an important right, again, protected by the First Amendment. Gives like-minded individuals the ability to come together and magnify their voices, work together for a common cause. The Supreme Court has long held that the privacy of association is just as important as associating itself, whether this was regarding membership or donors. If you remove the privacy, like the previous witness says, and you chill the freedom of association, it's already been mentioned that in 2010, California, actually I believe it was without a law, correct me on that, there was not a law. The Attorney General at the time, Kamala Harris, actually forced the nonprofits had to re-register each and every year and forced that the information actually be brought, the IRS 990 would be brought to the office each year whenever they had to re-register. It was, if they did not, they would be decertified in the state of California and wouldn't be able to operate there any longer. The state actually guaranteed that the information would remain confidential. However, a lot of those forms were actually posted online for public access, and those donors were revealed to the public. Americans for Prosperity Foundation and the Thomas More Law Center filed suit 2014. And we heard about the result of that in July 1st, 2021 with the 6-3 decision. But also, there was actually a lot of broad support on that as well, as there were briefs actually filed in support of Americans for Prosperity Foundation's position by the ACLU, NAACP, and the Human Rights Campaign. So a lot of great support. This does a lot to protect nonprofits across the state, protect Missouri residents and citizens, and we definitely would appreciate your support on it.
Thank you. Questions for the witness? Thank you, sir. Next witness in favor of the bill.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the committee. I'll be brief. My name is Zach Pruitt. I serve as Senior Counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom, a nonprofit legal advocacy organization dedicated to protecting constitutional rights such as religious liberty and the freedom of speech. I won't belabor a lot of the points that I was going to make have already been made. We were co-counsel in the AFPF Bonta case. We represented the Thomas More Law Center when the cases were consolidated out of the Ninth Circuit. So I'll just mention a couple of quick takeaways from that case since that happened in July. As mentioned by Jeremy just now, one of the things that's important to mention is the bipartisan nature of the amicus effort that surrounded that Supreme Court case. Nearly 300 amicus briefs were filed in support of our clients and AFPF in that case. Just the number alone is pretty astounding if you know anything about kind of Supreme Court litigation, but also the fact that they were so cross-ideological. I'm not aware of another issue that has been so bipartisan in nature with, again, a group like ADF and AFP and having groups, as mentioned, like the ACLU and Human Rights Campaign come alongside us and support us in that effort. But two quick takeaways from the case. Again, as already briefly mentioned, the Supreme Court made clear that blanket donor disclosure regimes are facially unconstitutional. The California regulation at issue was struck down as invalid by the Supreme Court. The second thing that's important is that the freedom of association was reaffirmed as just a foundational freedom. Again, the court used the NAACP versus Alabama case to kind of re-up this point. And again, as mentioned, that was the case where the civil rights era case where Alabama was trying to force the NAACP to give over its members list. NAACP refused. Ultimately, the Supreme Court held unanimously in favor of the NAACP. This bill follows in that tradition of the NAACP versus Alabama in the civil rights era. Fast forward 60 plus years to AFPF versus Bonta last July. In conclusion, this bill's on solid legal footing in line with the traditions and precedents of the Supreme Court, protecting privacy and association. It's just smart policy to ensure protections for nonprofits so they can raise money anonymously and operate as usual without fear of having their donor rolls exposed. And lastly, it's just good for Missourians while encouraging private giving and association, both of which benefit society in a myriad of ways. I appreciate your time. Happy to answer any questions. I did fill out my form online, so my information is there as well.
All right, thank you, sir. Questions for the witness? Thank you. Next witness in favor of the bill. Any other witnesses in favor? Any witnesses for informational purposes only? That will conclude the hearing on House Bill 2120. We will now move to a public hearing on House Bill 2452 with Representative Cook. Representative, please proceed when you're ready.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and committee members, my name is Benny Cook. I am the representative for Texas, Howell, Pulaski, and Phelps counties. Thank you for this opportunity to present House Bill 2452. This legislation removes the need for protocols with a physician in order for pharmacists to administer vaccines. In the past few years, pharmacists have been called upon during emergencies to immunize patients, and this skill set does not disappear after emergency is over. By reducing regulations on our more than capable, highly educated pharmacists, they can help my constituents. They can help my constituents in rural Missouri and help folks all across Missouri. This legislation will save our constituents money, give them greater access for health care. I would call this freedom legislation. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to introduce this bill. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions, but I believe the professionals that are here to testify in favor of this bill are more than capable of answering all those questions.
All right, thank you, Representative. You don't get off that easy.
I was hopeful.
Nice try. No, Representative, what, if you just had to say in one or two sentences, what is the goal of what you're trying to do here?
The goal is to give the pharmacists the ability to continue giving these vaccines after the emergency order is over. They were able to do this during the emergency order, and they're more than capable of doing this without the emergency order in place as well.
Is it just the COVID vaccine that you're talking about, or all vaccines?
All.
So and is it at least 7 years of age or the age? Is it for under 7, over 7, or what does that mean?
Over 7.
So anybody over, so they're not going to give the vaccinations for the little kids as they go up, the 80 million shots they have to get?
Just 7 and over.
Just 7 and over. And then, so it's just that they were able to do it during the pandemic.
Yes.
Everything was fine. Now you're just saying, let's just make that permanent.
Yes.
And keep doing that, but not under age 7.
Not under age 7.
Okay, and then will there be a standing order with the state? Are you extending that, or how does that work?
If they could, I think there's a gentleman here can double.
Okay.
Make sure that's.
Okay, so it's just to continue the vaccinations they were doing. And an example of a vaccination would be tetanus or something?
Yeah, any vaccine.
And then they would just say, hey, you can go to a pharmacist, there's a standing order.
Yes.
Because a lot of times it's hard to get into your doctor to get just a vaccine.
Yes, I mean it's very difficult, and just like in Kabul, Missouri, in my district, we do not have a clinic there, but we have a pharmacy. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Any other questions for the representative? Representative Davidson.
And this may be a better question for whomever comes up as a witness after you. I'm a little curious, though, about unexpected reactions to vaccines and what may happen or may not happen, I guess. Are there instances of people reacting poorly to a vaccine, and in those instances, could a pharmacist not be prepared to address an immediate need that vaccination presents?
Well, I can address some of that, but I'd say other ones behind me can address more. They do have to wait a certain amount of time in the pharmacy before they can leave to ensure there's no issues, basically. But if an issue does arise, a pharmacist is very capable, but they also, I have somebody very close to me that's a pharmacist, and they have had to call emergency services in before, for an issue in the pharmacy. So they do have to potentially call somebody in, but they are more than capable of handling the situation. They go through, 8 years of education.
Was that instance?
It didn't have, but that did not have anything to do with the vaccine, though. It was another situation.
Was that a response to medication that had been prescribed, and then?
No, it was a whole totally another situation.
You're just saying they called 911 because
they had to
of an
call 911
emergency.
because of a situation that occurred there involving somebody that came into the pharmacy. But they still called them for the extra assistance in there. But a pharmacist is very capable of taking care of pretty much any situation.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions for Representative Cook? All right, we'll start with witnesses in favor.
Chair, members of the committee, Henry Telemock with the Missouri Pharmacy Association to go on record as in support of Representative Cook's bill. And I'll try and answer some of the questions along with the testimony that I'm going to give. In 2020, prior to 2020, pharmacists had to receive a protocol to administer vaccines. These are basically collaborative practice agreements with a physician. It's a one-on-one protocol with a physician that states, here are the requirements you have to meet to administer these vaccines. Then we hit the pandemic. And because of the pandemic, there was a lack of access to care for patients. You had hospitals being overrun with COVID patients and physicians not being able to take care of the patients that they needed. So HHS created guidelines that said, hey, pharmacists, let's allow you to administer all vaccines, childhood vaccines and adult vaccines, to patients ages 3 to 18 for childhood vaccines, and then all other vaccines, administer them as well to adults. This was done in 2020, and about in 2021, it progressively got bigger as it was seen that there was a lack of access to care for a lot of patients. In that time, I will say that in the state of Missouri, pharmacists have been administering childhood vaccines as well as vaccines to adults, and there have only been, in 2020, I believe, 5 complaints about a pharmacist wrongly immunizing or there being a complaint against a pharmacist as they immunized. 5 complaints of a pharmacist immunizing. In 2021, I believe it is 3 patients who said, hey, look, there was an adverse effect, and here's the complaint that they brought to the Board of Pharmacy. Representative Davidson, you've asked about a pharmacist being able to administer these vaccines to a patient, and if a pharmacist is capable of handling this. Everyone reacts differently to vaccines. It always depends on, your DNA, how your body can handle certain, we're all allergic to a lot of things. So In regards to that, I'll say that 80%, this is solely COVID, 80% of COVID vaccines have been administered by pharmacists. That's about 229 million vaccines nationwide have been administered. In the state of Missouri, I believe it's between 70 or 80% have also been administered by pharmacists. And those complaints that have come in, out of the millions of vaccines given, only 3 complaints, or 5 complaints if you go in 2020, 3 complaints in 2021. Representative Patterson, you've asked about the age requirements. So there was an agreement that came about in 2018 that said that pharmacists can administer vaccines to children 7 years or older. That was an agreement that came about from physician groups and the Pharmacy Association and other various stakeholders that saw that below the age of 7, there are screenings that I believe you would know. There are screenings and protocols and tests that a child will need to have a one-on-one affiliation or patient relationship, patient-provider relationship with their provider to ensure that they're going based on their the schedule provided by the ACIP and CDC. But 7 years old was the agreement. That is what we are keeping in statute. There was a thought of possibly saying, hey, look, HHS says 3 years old and up, and there haven't been complaints regarding pharmacists administering at 3, but we want to keep what's in statute in play just to say, hey, look, we're working with everyone on this. There has been one issue that was brought forward by some of the stakeholders, and we're working with them. Their concern is on 3 vaccines. It's anthrax, typhoid, and yellow fever. Those are considered travel vaccines. We've had conversations in regards to anthrax, typhoid, and yellow fever. Those are vaccines, either oral or injection, that do need protocols that need to be followed. So we have no issues with working with the stakeholders on that. And the other 2 points that I'll hit on very quickly, it's a statewide standing order which authorizes DHSS to, in essence, create a pathway for pharmacists to continue to test for COVID. Right now, pharmacists are testing for COVID and other disease states under federal guidelines. We're just wanting to give DHSS the authority to say, hey, look, we want you guys to continue to do this. We're not trying to say pharmacists can do everything under the sun. We just want to work to keep what's in statute readily available for patients. The last piece is the emergency powers for DHSS and the Board of Pharmacy to authorize the administration and dispensing of medication, and that only came about because of COVID. And when the COVID vaccine came out, there was the federal guidelines that came out were all over the place. No one knew who superseded who. Did the state have sovereignty or did the federal government have sovereignty? So that piece is just to say DHSS has the authority to go based on federal guidelines to say, hey, pharmacists, we're now in another pandemic. Hopefully we never get in one. But now we're in another pandemic. We need you to administer these vaccines, just like in 2009 when pharmacists were allowed to actually administer the H1N5, I believe, vaccine to patients, just like they were called upon then. We just want to have that in statute to not muddy the waters in the future. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
So the collaborative agreement, is that with the state and that pharmacist? Or is there an actual doctor and that pharmacist? Does that continue?
For the vaccines or for the
vaccines?
So for the vaccines, it would
be a standing order?
It wouldn't be a standing order. So for the vaccines, what it would do is, in essence, just use what HHS has said. Pharmacists administer the vaccines. But we are having the Board of Pharmacy and the Board of Healing Arts promulgate those rules, requirements, and training mandates that a pharmacist may need to meet in order to administer these vaccines. So we're not taking the physicians out of the equation. We're just adding a layer of, I'd say, experts to work with different experts to create those rules.
And will they approve every pharmacist? Okay, you're approved, now you can do this? Or that'll just to be decided?
I don't want to speak for the board, but I believe that a pharmacist would have to meet those requirements and register with the board under their own NPI to say, hey, look, you're authorized to go about and vaccinate based off your training requirements that you've met.
All right, thank you. Further questions? All right, thank you, sir. Witness in opposition to the bill?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Heidi Geis-Bueller Sutherland here on behalf of the Missouri State Medical Association. We are in opposition to the bill, but it's really a more of a soft opposition. I think that there are probably just a few tweaks that need to be made to get this to a place where we would be comfortable with it. We've spoken with the sponsor and also with the Pharmacy Association. One of those tweaks in particular is, as Henrio mentioned, dealing with some of these vaccines that aren't really ones that fall into the routine vaccine sort of list, like polio, measles, things like that. We're talking about vaccines for people who travel, people who serve in the military, maybe people who work in labs, and those are for viruses, for diseases like Japanese encephalitis. I mean, tick-borne encephalitis is another one that was just approved for use in the U.S. last year. So these are vaccines that we would really like a doctor to be involved in if a patient is receiving those vaccines, because if you're at risk for getting one of those diseases, you probably need some other discussions on risk mitigation and things like that, how to recognize symptoms if you do contract the disease, et cetera.
All right, thank you, Ms. Gaspieler. Any questions for the witness? Thank you. Witness in favor of the bill.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Kimberly Grinston, Executive Director for the Missouri Board of Pharmacy, and of course, we license and regulate the practice of pharmacy in the state of Missouri. Just want to go on record in support of the bill. I won't reiterate what's already been said. I would note that the bill would increase access to patient care and allow pharmacists to better respond in the event of an emergency. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Questions for the witness? Thank you. Thank you for being here today. Witness in opposition to the bill. Are there any other witnesses in opposition? Next witness in favor of the bill.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jackie Barget. I'm a registered lobbyist for Walgreens, and we would also like to go on record in support of the bill for the same reasons that Henrio mentioned. If you think about this in a standpoint of where Walgreens are, they are in the rural areas where there might not be a doctor close by. They're in urban areas where someone might not have modes of transportation to get to a doctor. But we would like to go on record in support as well.
Questions for the witness? Thank you. Witness in favor of the bill. Any other witnesses in favor?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I am Emily Ibaugh here tonight representing Hy-Vee. I will just simply echo the comments made by Henrio and Walgreens and go on record in support of House Bill 2452. Obviously, all of Hy-Vee's pharmacists are well-trained, and Hy-Vee's across the Northwest and west part of Missouri are well-positioned to support the healthcare industry. So with that, I'll just urge your support of House Bill 2452. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the witness? Thank you. Thanks for being here. Next witness in favor of the bill. Is there anyone here for informational purposes only? That will conclude the hearing on House Bill 2452. We will now move into executive session. We will not be taking any action on House Bills 1456 or 1929. I move that we do pass House Bill 2574. Discussion? I have a substitute for House Bill 2574. It has been distributed. Discussion on the substitute. I see a couple of the Representative Mayhew, did you want to speak on the substitute? I'll speak to it. The penalty provisions are now different, which I think Representative Smith brought up last time. And we've added detached back in. Those are the changes that I see. Any other discussion? All right. I move that we do adopt the substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. And the ayes have it. You've adopted the substitute. I now move that we vote do pass on House Committee substitute for House Bill 2574. Please call the roll.
Chairman Patterson.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Davidson. Representatives Ani. Cups. Fitzwater. Fogel. Gregory. Hafner. Hicks. McCrary. Ritchie. Sauls. Smith. Taylor. Gregory.
By your vote of 14-0, you have voted do pass on House Committee Substitute for House Bill 2574. Next, I move that we do pass House Bill 2365. This is Representative Shields' Learning Quality Assurance Bill. It removes the sunset and provides a continuous quality improvement process for early learning programs. Discussion? Seeing none, I move that we do pass House Bill 2365. Please call the roll.
Chairman Patterson.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Davidson. Representatives Ani. Cups. Fitzwater. Fogel. Gregory. Hafner. Hicks. McCrary. Ritchie. Sauls. Smith. Taylor.
By your vote of 13-1, you have voted do pass on House Bill 2365. Next, I move that we vote do pass on House Bill 2341. This is Representative Shields' Early Childhood Education Bill. Any discussion? Representative Davidson.
I'm going to vote aye on this bill, but with reservations still considering the fiscal note, and so I wanted that to be on the record. I'm looking forward to hearing more conversation and more expertise from the chamber being brought to the legislation.
All right, thank you, Representative. Any other discussion? Please call the roll.
Chairman Patterson.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Davidson. Representatives Ani. Cups. Fitzwater. Fogel. Gregory. Hafner. Hicks. Sorry, isn't there yet? McCrary. Ritchie. Sauls. Smith. Taylor.
By your vote of 13-1, you voted do pass on House Bill 2341. Next, I move that we vote do pass on House Bill 2412. Discussion. Representative Smith. We have amendments, Representative. Okay, any other discussion? I have an amendment. It ends in .09H. It's been distributed, and I move for its adoption. There has been a lot of collaboration on these amendments. Representative Hicks, did you want to speak to this amendment? .09H.
On .09H, the amendment, okay, so we had talks before we passed my language out. We asked to keep it clean, and you had done so. This is the second version of the bill that Representative Dogan had, and it increases the amount of money. So his amendment, what it will do is increase the amount that we talked about, the $36,000 level, and bring that up to the $51,000 level. After collaborating and talking with a bunch of individuals, they came to the conclusion that $36,000, as we all know, for what we get paid for being here, is not a very high level. It's kind of considered in the poverty level. And here we're trying to make someone whole again after we have incarcerated them wrongfully. So Representative Dogan has put the amendment forth to bring that up to $51,000 a year. I do agree with him on that myself, so I will support his amendment. What it will do is it'll allow the other amendment, I believe, is it in
right, and you can speak to both. This is .09H. It's the one that has the removal of the biometric samples and data.
So that's the DNA side of that.
Yes.
The other side of that was DNA evidence. Okay, if you're exonerated and you're removed from DNA evidence, you would also like that DNA evidence removed from record afterwards. You don't want your DNA on record on record, you're able to have that exonerated and removed as well. I mean, we're making you whole. We want to keep you to the way you were before you went into the system. If the DNA evidence was used then to take you out of the system, we'd like to have the DNA also removed so that that can't be used further down the road.
Seems very reasonable. Further discussion?
And I can't answer any questions if you have them.
All right, seeing none, I move for the adoption of House Committee Amendment 1 ending in .09H. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. And the ayes have it. You've adopted the amendment. I have an amendment. It ends in .01H. It's been distributed, and I move for its adoption. Discussion. Representative Hicks.
If I may, this is the one I was speaking on in the original part of it with the two amendments. You have the one that brings from 36 to 51. You have the other one that's dealing in the DNA. The 36 to 51 was the one I originally talked about. It's across the board. It also has been accepted by both sides of the aisle as well. It was talks that were brought in by both sides.
We've obviously worked with all the members on both sides of the aisle, so thank you. Any other discussion on this amendment? I renew my motion for the adoption of House Committee Amendment 2 ending in .01H. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. And the ayes have it. You have adopted the amendment. I now move that we take the amendments and roll them into a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. And the ayes have it. You've adopted the substitute. I now move that we vote do pass on the House Committee substitute for House Bill 2412. Please call the roll.
I have a comment.
Representative Smith?
I just want to say, I think this, as I mentioned before, I think it's a good bill. I think in many ways it's long overdue, and so I'm glad it's being brought forward. And I'm especially pleased with the amendments. I think they make it better than it was before, so I'm all in favor of the amendments. I still have the issue with not being able to file a civil suit, and even though it's better, and I appreciate it going from $36,000 a year to $51,000 a year, there are people, if you're wrongfully convicted and a prosecutor hides evidence, they lie, they abuse a process, and say you go to prison for 5 years, from the state penitentiary, you will have a case, and you're talking $2-3 million, I mean, depending. This you're capped at $250,000, which is not that much. Now, so people who don't have a case, for example, a witness lies about them, it's nothing to do with the prosecutor, it's great for them. So in that situation, it can help people, but you're going to have the people that have been really set up by the state, they're really going to lose. The bill's better. I'm going to vote present on this because of that.
Representative Hicks?
If we were able to address that situation there and even put it to where someone in that situation could be opt out of this program, would you be okay with that?
Oh, yeah, people who've been,
So you basically would have the option to either take what the state is offering or you would have the option to sue. You would be okay with that if we could figure that out.
Yeah, I thought about that, potentially. I mean, the issue is if someone's getting out and they don't have a chance to talk to an attorney, would they have time to think it over? In other words, someone says, here's a check, will you take it?
Let's give them time to speak with counsel.
Yeah, I mean, a decent amount of time. I mean, that's my only hang-up, as long as people aren't forced into making a rash decision. But if they have adequate time to seek counsel, then yes. I mean, if someone wants to waive their right, I guess they could and then take the money. But that's the only hang-up, because I really believe that it could really hurt a lot of people. I mean, there's people now who have settlements, multi-million-dollar settlements, who've been in jail, prison wrongfully, and then it just kind of, and not only that, but to digress a little bit, I mean, maybe remember the Ford Pinto case years ago. Yeah. Sorry. So years ago, it's kind of before my time as well. So Ford Pinto, they designed
explosions.
Yeah, explosions. Right, the gas tank was in a place in the car where if they were rear-ended, they would explode and people would burn. And there was a damage assessment. I think they were capped at damages at the time, and they knew that they weren't going to be hit with huge damages. And so they made just an assessment, and they said, you know what, it's easier for us and cheaper for us to pay families who've been burned alive than it is to fix the gas tank issue. But then later on, now you have more punitive damages, and now that's not the case. And so what I don't want to have happen is for the state to think, yeah, we could hide evidence, we could do this, because we're capped at paying $50,000 a year, and someone does a lot of time. I want there to be that exposure to make the state think twice about hiding evidence.
Just to let the committee know, I'll work offline with him on this.
Thanks.
Gentlemen, thanks for that discussion. That was a good discussion. Representative Ani?
Just briefly, to address that, I believe that other states have actually put in offset provisions. Is that what we're talking about? So, okay.
And I'd be okay with an offset provision. So if you got paid under this and then you settle the $3 million suit, you have to pay the state back. I
Right.
think that's fine and fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Other than that, I just want to say I really appreciate the collaboration on this piece of legislation. I've really enjoyed working with both bill sponsors and our team. I think that this has been a really wonderful process, and I really appreciate that. So thank you. Yes, thank you so much.
All right, Representative Ritchie.
Just real quick, it would be interesting to get your take on this. Because of the circumstances related to an individual that has been released under these circumstances, not really having any economic means really to work with as they're trying to get reestablished, right? I do think it would be interesting to consider, we've got this $51,000, per year that they were incarcerated wrongly. Maybe having a situation where they receive a check for the first year, $51,000 to get them established. They've got time now to make decisions, and then they decide to go ahead and file suit. They win, and that $51,000 doesn't get clawed back because it was kind of an establishment of building a foundation for them economically to be able to work in a way that is fair for them. Because if you are, obviously you can hire an attorney, and that attorney can just wait to be paid until you win, right? But you still have to have some way to get started economically as an individual. So I think it would be interesting to conceive of a process where, to do right by the individual, they were wrongly convicted. $51,000 would be what they're first handed with no decision having to be made. Give them time to make that decision. If they want to be able to just say, I'll sign, I'll take the rest of the money, I'm not going to file suit, that's fine. If I do sue and I win, that $51,000 is still mine. That would be an interesting concept. Would you think that would there be a downside to that other than the fact that we're, in it for $51,000?
I mean, I don't know about a downside other than, are people going to want to pass a bill where you're just giving someone $50,000 and they walk and then, but I mean, I think that's fine.
I mean, it's a circumstance where someone was wrongly convicted.
Sure.
And if they're gonna potentially win a case, then they've got some evidence to suggest that there was intent, as well. It wasn't just at the time we didn't have the ability to have evidence the way that we do now, kind of thing, right? So anyway, just a thought.
That's good.
Any further discussion? Great discussion tonight. All right. Madam Clerk, I renew my motion that we vote do pass on House Committee substitute for 2412. Please call the roll.
Chairman Patterson.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Davidson. Aye. Representatives Ani. Cups. Fitzwater. Fogle. Gregory. Hafner. Hicks. McCrary. Ritchie. Sauls. Smith. Taylor.
By your vote of 13 yes and 1 present, you have voted do pass on House Committee substitute for House Bill 2412. That concludes the hearing. Thank you.